I'm here with mayoral candidate Saunteel Jenkins. Thank you so much for joining us on Detroit Next.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I think, your experience in this race is a little unique compared to the rest of the candidates. You served on the city council. You've
Yes.
also been running up until fairly recently when you decided to run for mayor, a pretty large nonprofit organization.
Mm.
Tell us about how those experiences and other experiences and other roles that you've had have prepared you to take on the big job of being the mayor of Detroit.
Sure. I believe my experience is unique as well. I'll start with the fact that I've been a CEO for over a decade, and the mayor is the CEO of the city of Detroit. So that experience is paramount. As a legislator or a council member, you're passing ordinances, you're writing them and passing them. You are amending the budget and passing the budget, but you're not responsible for implementing those things, right? A CEO has to manage whatever budget is put in place. They have to manage the policies and the rules of governance that are in place. So understanding that the buck stops with you as a CEO and how the intended and unintended consequences of policies and budgets impact your bottom line and the people you're serving. And a CEO has to make tough decisions often. So I feel having the legislative experience on city council and being a CEO, as well as experience in nonprofit, for profit, government, and education all make me uniquely prepared for this position.
For folks that don't know what the Heating and Warmth Fund is,
Mm.
give us kind of an overview of like the responsibilities of that organization and things that you did, to really serve kind of the base needs of a lot of Detroiters because
Mhm.
that organization, not to get ahead of your answer, but basically what I see it as kind of a social service organization that tries to make sure people can afford their utility bills, right?
Yeah, you summed it up well. The Heat and Warmth Fund has been around since 1985. And since 1985, they've been providing assistance with heat and electricity for struggling families across the state. It's a statewide organization. When I came in 2014, one of the biggest issues we were having across the city was increasing affordability, um, issues with water.
Hmm.
And I started THAW's first water program in 30 years in 2015. So now it's heat, electricity, and water. We also provide assistance with home repairs, and we have programs for people with chronic health conditions and mothers with high risk pregnancies because all of those things are impacted by whether or not you can stay warm at night, whether or not you can refrigerate your medicine, or whether or not you have clean, safe water in your house.
At THAW, you also helped create a $5 million grant program, state funded, that helped residents of the state pay off their water bill debt.
Yeah.
You talked about adding that to the heating and warmth piece of it.
Yes.
What's the impact of that been? I mean, we hear a lot about water affordability
Mhm.
issues and, the shutoff crisis during COVID, and there
Yes.
was a moratorium on that for a period of time that's been
Mhm.
lifted now. Um, what has been your experience with water affordability in the city, and how did that program help?
Oh, the impact of that program has been huge. I started advocating in the legislature for assistance with water, I guess, soon as I got to THAW. And when I got there, many legislators were still saying, no, water is the most affordable utility, which was true, but that was quickly changing. And affordable to some is still not affordable to others. So the importance of having the water affordability, I kept pushing, and fortunately, I was able to get a $5 million allocation from the legislature before Democrats had a trifecta. I think that's important
Yeah, this
because
was
I
under
had to
Republican control.
correct. I had to work across the aisle to get this done, which our next mayor will have to do as well. But the impact of families having clean, safe water is immeasurable, especially after COVID, right? During and after COVID, it's been so important. The other thing that that program does is provide minor plumbing repairs. So we'll replace toilets and repair leaks that drive up a bill as well. So that makes your bill more affordable long term because it's more efficient. Your home is more efficient.
Do you There was a lot of pressure on the water department at the city, as we were kind of coming out of the pandemic.
Mhm,
Pressure to continue a moratorium on water
mhm,
shutoffs, and ultimately the city decided that they were going to implement some programs to make it easier for people to tackle the debt that they had in the
yes,
water system. But water shutoffs have come back. What
yes.
what would be your approach on that issue? Would you do things differently? Would you reinstate some kind of moratorium, or what's your philosophy on shutoffs in general?
I think the city has to make the programs that are in place easier for people to access. They're not very easy for people to access right now, but I don't think a moratorium is the answer. During COVID, one of the things that happened was the moratorium on shutoffs. It was good and it was needed during COVID, but when COVID ended, those bills were still there. But people were in a tougher position because a bill that might have been $200 was now $2,000. And that was water, that was heat, that was electricity. So we're not helping people by delaying the problem and letting it multiply. You help people by finding solutions to make their bills more affordable long term.
And what is that? Help me understand the problem here of people racking up this insane debt. I
Oh,
would imagine part of it's an income problem, right?
absolutely.
Part of it might be on the city. We need to find ways to bring down the cost of these things. But how are people coming into so much debt in the first place?
There are basically two ways to reduce people's utility bills or the burden of their utility bills. The first is to increase their income. The second is to decrease their costs. You decrease their costs by making their home more energy efficient, right? You reduce the water usage. Part of it is education, right? At THAW, we educate people on how to conserve water, how to conserve energy, but there isn't enough conservation we can teach if all the heat is going through a hole in your roof. So we have to find ways to help people make their homes more energy efficient by fixing the roof, by offering ways for people to get new windows. And those are the kind of solutions that I created while at Thaw because I knew as long as we didn't address the root cause of the problem, every year people would have to come back, especially seniors, because their incomes aren't going up and their homes aren't getting newer. So what can we do to address the problem?
You mentioned the budget earlier. We are coming out of, I mean, we are at the end now officially of Detroit's long process of approving its annual budget. We got a
Mhm,
$3 billion budget. During that whole process, concerns about home repair. We have a couple of programs that help seniors replace their roofs and windows.
mhm,
There's other home repair programs that are set up through the city's housing department. Some of them are federally funded through pandemic relief dollars that will
mm,
not be available for the next mayor. They will
that's
be
right.
totally spent, right? Others rely on money from the federal government that may not be there. We don't really know what's going to happen with that. Um, so I mean, I see these kind of like heat and utility affordability issues are very tied to like home repair. If you have old
Absolutely.
windows, if you got a hole in your roof, you're losing that natural gas payment is just
Yes.
literally going out the window. So I guess my question is to you, like, what are we going to do about that if you were to become mayor, knowing that we have some limited resources in addressing
Mhm,
that?
mhm.
And how critical is home repair really to this overall kind of problem that we've been talking about?
Oh, home repair is extremely critical, especially in a city like Detroit where we have so many old homes and so many families struggling. We have to have money for home repair programs, most both minor and major home repairs. And if we set aside that one time money to make a home more energy efficient, the long-term savings are much greater. And not only the savings in terms of dollars, but the quality of life for the families who live in those homes improves exponentially. And so I think that's really important. As a kid who actually lived in a home, where we had our heat cut off. We had our electricity cut off. So I know what that feels like.
Mhm.
The impact that that has on a child that's gotta wake up and go to school after sleeping in a room with a kerosene heater all night, right? Or coming home and knowing your house is the only house on the block that's dark. There are immeasurable impacts that those kinds of things have on kids and parents who feel ashamed because they can't take care of their kids. And if we could put a few $1,000s into each home or several, sometimes it's more than a few, it's $10,000. But now you have an energy efficient home. You have bills that the family can afford, and most people want to pay their bills. They just don't make enough money, right? Or they have an emergency and ends don't meet. If we can find ways to resolve that problem, then the spin-off effect of that is immeasurable.
Do we have resources to do that? I mean, part of, I think, the concern that I've been hearing from a lot of folks is that we just I hear a lot of anxiety about the
Mhm.
financial future of the city, and if we have
Yes.
the ability to really throw resources at big problems like that, I think that's why a lot of your contemporaries in this race have been saying we'll look to philanthropy, we'll look to
Mhm.
corporations to help fill
Mhm.
some of that gap. Does the city have resources to further invest in home repair? Would you go other places to find some of that money?
Yes, and yes. The city has resources, and the city will have to prioritize the resources that it does have, but we will also have to build coalitions and partnerships, and I've done that. That's how I've been so successful at THAW. I've built relationships with nonprofits. I've built relationships with philanthropy. I'm a former trustee of the board for the Kresge Foundation. So I know philanthropy well and know how to work with them to help fill some of the gaps.
So Detroit finalized its $3 billion with a B dollar
Mhm.
budget. What was the size of the budget at Thaw?
20,000,000, 20 to 25,000,000. The lowest was about 17,000,000 while I was there. The highest was about 26,000,000, and like most nonprofits, it varied from year to year.
Mhm. The reason I ask, I mean, obviously that's a much larger the city is a
Absolutely.
much larger
Mhm.
organization, right?
Yeah.
Um, and you talked about your executive experience, your CEO experience.
Mhm.
I'm curious about who you're gonna bring in to
Mm.
help you do this. You know, the mayor has a big job, but it's not solely on their shoulders.
Right.
There's a cabinet, there's department heads.
Mhm.
Mayor Duggan brought on a lot of people that he had kind of crossed paths with, worked under him in his various roles before
Mhm.
becoming the mayor at the Detroit Medical Center and at the county and some of the other jobs that he did.
Yes.
Do you have kind of a bench of people that you're going to be bringing in? Do you plan to keep a lot of continuity there with his administration staff? How would you kind of approach that?
It'll be a combination of both. There are people in the Duggan administration that are highly talented and are doing a good job. Those people I would work to keep. I know some of them are leaving as we speak,
Yeah.
so hopefully everybody, who is highly talented won't leave before the next mayor comes in, which I hope to be me. But also, over my time, I have built up really strong relationships in nonprofit, across government, across philanthropy. The benefit of having worked with the corporate community and the philanthropy community and so many nonprofits is that I've worked with a lot of highly talented people that some of them I'm tapping as I work through my policies and my platform for this race, but also I tap them if the voters decide I should be our next mayor.
Mhm. Are there particular departments that you see as being like more critical than others?
Wow. So the finance and budget departments are absolutely critical because that's where it all starts and ends,
Mhm.
right? So making sure that we continue our revenue conferences, making sure that we continue our responsible fiscal practices, which have enabled us to increase our credit ratings, will be very important. So, yes, that is critical. Another department that I think is critical that the city figures out and makes more efficient is building safety and engineering.
Mhm.
It's right now about 77 steps to start a new business in the city of Detroit, which makes that's a real barrier to entry. If we want to be a city that is business friendly and we say we want to attract investment and innovation and jobs, we have to make it easier to do that. So, our licensing process, the permitting process for businesses and for residents. When I talk to residents, if you're having your kitchen remodeled, you have to have 3 inspectors. You gotta take off work 3 times
Mhm.
for them to inspect your kitchen. That's not the way it should be. If we 3 inspectors could show up at the same time, why wouldn't we make it easier for our residents and businesses?
On the inspection point, the city has made some changes in the last year to its rental inspection
Mhm.
process for housing,
Yes.
basically to streamline that because there was a huge checklist and it ultimately did not really improve the number of rental properties that were coming into compliance with the
Right.
city. They found that, punishing people going through the kind of enforcement mechanism wasn't
Right.
working. So let's try to make it easier and work with.
That's right.
Um, I'm imagining there's probably some crossover with your work at THAW as well,
Mhm.
seeing homes in substandard conditions.
Absolutely.
Um, what would you do to help improve conditions of the housing in the city,
Mhm.
for renters in particular?
And first, I wanna say I think that's a great example of the importance between understanding when you're writing a law and when you have to execute, right, and manage based on that law,
What is the
the
outcome of the
difference.
policy? Yeah.
Right, that's right. And having a rental registration policy that encourages people not to register their property or makes it very hard for people to be in compliance is not the answer, right? And you have unintended consequences because we can inspect homes that we don't know are being rented. So, yes, I've seen that at Thaw, and we have to find the balance and make sure that homes are safe, that they continue to be affordable, but the living conditions. If we're charging people to live in a home, they have to be the living conditions have to be healthy, and it's gotta be safe for families, seniors, and kids.
Mm. You had mentioned earlier you're hoping that there's not a complete exodus of, of Duggan officials. Uh, do you see yourself as bringing some continuity between yourself and the Duggan administration? A lot of the folks that are in this race have talked about how
Mm,
he's done a good job, and we want to keep some of those things continuing, but
mhm.
also they have their own vision for things. Where do you kind of fall along that? How much continuity are you trying to pitch to Detroiters of what we've seen over the last 10+ years under him?
I think I bring stability. And that is the continuity. At the end of the day, what people want, whether it's residents or businesses, people want stability. And I think that I bring stability and I've brought stability to every place I've been. On council, that was one of the things people said, you're a calm, stable voice at the table, you're a rational, whatever the adjective was at Thaw. And I would do the same thing as mayor. I would bring stability, and there are some things that I wouldn't change, but of course, there are things that I would change.
When you were on the city council, it was a much different time for the city,
Yes.
much different time for the city's finances. You guys had to make some really tough calls.
Mhm.
Went back and read the coverage of the time, and there were some really harsh cuts in some of the Mayor Bing budgets that you were presented with at the time and had to make decisions on.
Mhm.
Um, just take us back to that time a little bit. Explain to us, what it was like to try to make things run the way that they should with limited resources. And I don't know how far have we really come since then.
Oh, we've come a very long way, but things are still much more fragile than I think people realize. So we've definitely come a long way. Before the bankruptcy, we were spending 60 cents of every dollar on debt. Before we paid a cop, before we cut the grass, before we shoveled the snow, that was just not, sustainable. So we've come a long way past that, but the next mayor is gonna have some challenges that our current mayor didn't have. We don't have a zero balance sheet anymore. Pension payments are coming due. Grand bargain payments are going away. The $949 million that came to the city from in CARES and opera dollars won't be there, but positions will be there. Programs will be there that were created with those dollars, and the next mayor will have to figure it all out.
What do you think about the city's use of ARPA funding just in general? Like, have we made the best use of that 870-ish million that we got?
Uh, in some cases, yes. In other cases, I think it could have been used better. When you drive neighborhoods and you're in a neighborhood where there are no houses on the block and there's a new sidewalk. Like, well, was that the best use of those resources? But when you go to parks that had not been kept up for years and you see kids and families there playing on the new playscape, that was a great use of dollars. The home repair programs that are helping people stay in their homes and making their utilities more affordable was a great use of city resources. So there are some cases where it was used well, and there are other cases where I think it could have been done better.
What would your approach have been at the time, to backseat quarterback this, I guess, a little bit? Because one frustration that I had heard about how this, what was decided, for this funding was that it happened, during the pandemic, and so a lot of these were virtual meetings.
Mhm,
So basically, I'm asking you about, your approach to public engagement and
mhm,
transparency
mhm.
and how you make decisions, in partnership with community. Like,
Yeah.
how would
Mhm.
you go about that?
Yeah. So one of the items on Santeel's 6 priorities is strategic master planning.
Mhm.
And the reason that's important and the reason I bring it up is because part of it is and has to be community input. It is input from residents across this city about what they believe their neighborhood, their community should look like. First of all, the master plan should be one for each of the 7 districts. Because we now have districts, our master planning should account for that. But in District 1, that community would have full input into the plan. Land use, public safety, education should be a part of it, business development, clean energy, all of those things should be a part of the strategic master plan. And if, for instance, the residents in District 1 say they want 2 restaurants and a grocery store and a cleaners, then we should be offering tax incentives to people who are gonna bring 2 restaurants, a grocery store, and a cleaners.
Mhm.
The transparency that provides is, 1, nobody's surprised about the grocery store because they help decide what it should look like. 2, nobody's surprised about tax incentives because the written plan says developers who are gonna bring these things, we're gonna provide these incentives for you, this level of incentives, and it's higher if you live in the district, it's slightly lower if you live in the Detroit, but not the district, and it's lower than that if you don't live in the city. So that's the kind of transparency that I wanna create in government, not just with master planning, but across the board. Citizens should have a say.
I was talking to a former state lawmaker who I
Mhm,
will not name about this concept of having a master plan for every city council district. We're
mhm,
in the middle of creating a citywide master plan right
yes.
now.
Mhm,
The first time we've done it in about a decade, and then
mhm.
there's a number of other strategic neighborhood plans.
Yes,
I think they're
mhm.
called
The
for
strategic neighborhood p yes.
different parts of the city. Like my neighborhood has one. I'm not sure if everyone does, but incrementally, like neighborhoods have been getting these plans.
Right.
And so when I brought up the idea of, another kind of planning effort, this person was kind of like, that sounds good. I think we all agree that there should be public engagement and strategic decision making and everything.
Mhm,
But also, I want a mayor who's going to do things. And also, residents have kind of told public officials what they need in their neighborhoods a lot already.
mm,
That creating kind of another planning process is asking people, it's asking a lot for folks to kind
mhm.
of get involved in another city planning decision. So I just wanted to get your feedback from that. What's your response to that?
So 2 things. 1, our current planning process is about land use,
Hmm.
right? Which is a very important part of planning, but it's not the only thing that goes into planning, right? And all those things that I just talked about need to be a part of planning as well. If it's just land use, things like a brand new sidewalk on a block with no houses happen, right? If we have a strategic master plan that accounts for everything, when we get ARPA dollars, we can just go to our master plan and say, you know what, these are the places that we can invest these dollars because it's already in place. And as far as community input, I have not had one resident in a home meeting. I have had one person say to me, "I think residents are all planned out." And it was a business person.
Mhm.
It wasn't a resident. I haven't had one resident say to me, "I'm all planned out." And the other piece is not every neighborhood is included in those conversations.
Yeah. I definitely agree on the latter part of that. I think there are people that have been left out of the conversation.
Yes.
What do you do to get them involved? I mean, especially when there's a kind of disillusionment or a frustration with city government, probably earned in a lot of cases, right? These are people that probably tried to get involved at one point and were pushed out.
Right.
And also, maybe the city hasn't come around in a while and asked their opinion
Mhm.
on anything.
Right.
How do we reach out to some of those,
Mhm.
kind of forgotten pockets of the city?
You you go everywhere, right? You do as much as possible what I'm doing now, talking to Detroiters all over the city. But the other piece is you have to deliver on your promises, right? And while the master planning process will take longer, there are little things along the way that we could do to, right, to give residents confidence that, okay, she's going to do what she said she would do, right? While we're doing this, going through this planning process, there's this building on the corner over here that has been sitting there, open to trespass for 2 years, and we've been calling and nobody responded. There's a senior building that needs repairs and nobody has responded when we call. Those are things that the city can do right now while we're in the process that will help reinstill faith, right, in our government for residents.
You mentioned Saunteel 6, your six policy
Yes.
priorities.
Mhm.
Lay those out for us, and then we
Yeah.
can dive into it a little bit more.
Yeah, the Saunteel 6 are neighborhoods that are vibrant and safe. Number 2 is safety because safety is non-negotiable. Number 3 is economic opportunity and jobs for all. Number 4 is putting small businesses back in business because it is the backbone of this city, especially Black and women-owned businesses. Number 5 is partnership with our schools because we have to have stronger schools to have a stronger city. And then number 6 is public transit to bring it all together.
Mhm.
And we can talk more specifically about whichever of those
We
you'd
could
like.
probably have a podcast about each of them individually.
Yes, for sure.
I want to start with public safety because that's a top issue that we get a lot of feedback on. When
Mhm.
we had first met, you explained to me, the story of losing your brother to gun violence, and
Mm.
we don't have to go through all of that right here.
Thank you.
But I do know that I bring it up because you've been personally impacted by this
Mm.
issue,
Yes.
and I want to know, what is your plan for making the city safer? There's been a lot of celebration in the last few years about
Mhm.
crime rates trending in the right direction
Mhm.
in Detroit, taking advantage of some new partnerships with community
Mm.
organizations to bring down shootings.
Yes.
And I think people are, celebrating that, but also very concerned about, where that could head. And also, when you're in a neighborhood where something has happened, you're not celebrating
That's
alongside
right.
the places that
Right.
have been, made safer. So
Yeah. There are still neighborhoods in this city who are asking, why are people celebrating? Or feel left out because they say, well, those historic lows aren't happening on my block, right? So we really have to be careful while we're celebrating the progress. We have to make sure that we're clear about the fact that we know that our work is not done, right? Until every child in this city feels safe, until every parent feels safe sending their son or daughter to the store, our work is not done. So it's twofold. And I think it's always really important when we talk about community safety to talk about prevention because the answer is not over policing a community, right? Some of this is about making sure that people have safe places and spaces to go. And it's about making sure that our kids understand that there are good options for them and us giving them access to those good options so that they make better choices. And you know, I do want to tell you about my brother because when my brother died, my mom, when I went through my grief stages and I was going to quit school and I was in my anger stage, my mother said to me that I shouldn't quit school because although my brother was loved and hugged every day. The kids who thought his jacket was worth more than his life needed an intervention. And she said, if they had been loved more, my brother might be alive. So, and I tell that story because it's so important. There aren't any throwaway kids, and it's important that we catch kids early and make sure that they know that there are great options available to them and that we're creating safe places and safe spaces during the hours of 3 p.m. and 8 p.m., which are the most dangerous hours for kids. It's important that we can flip, right, the model that we currently have where we're spending $5 on the jail for every $1 we spend on prevention and after school programming, because those are the things that will make our kids safer and more prosperous long term. Now, you layer on top of that community policing, which is important, and making sure that our police are invested in our neighborhoods and communities and that our residents know who they are because they're showing up in good times and bad.
Mhm.
That, as Benny Napoleon, God rest his soul, used to call them beat cops, are actually walking the beat and stopping at the coffee shop, or the grocery store and saying, hey, I'm Officer Tony. Good to see you today. You need anything? No? Okay. I'm leaving, right? So that's important. Building those relationships between youth and police are important. And the community violence intervention is also a piece of it.
You've
But there are
talked about
multiple pieces.
you've talked about wanting to bring back beat cops on
Yeah.
neighborhoods, right?
Yes.
What does that look like? Because we have some kind of neighborhood police.
Mhm.
It's the first job basically somebody does when they come out of the academy. They become like the neighborhood patrol officer is the
Right.
term for it, right?
Mhm.
But it sounds like what you're looking for is something a little bit different.
Yeah, it's similar, but it's more, right? They're more and it's more in depth. I was recently talking to the beat cop or the NPO in Corktown, and there's one
Wow.
left
Yeah, that's kind of surprising.
for all of Corktown, right? And he was doing an amazing job, so this is a knock on him, but I was talking to him and asking him about it, and talking to business owners there. There's one. They all know him, but when he's off duty,
Yeah.
who's there, right? So we need more. Benny would say 1 for each square mile. If possible, I'd say 2 for each square mile, but that would require, looking at the budget to see if we have the resources to do it. But there has to be ways where we can increase community policing and things like the blue pigs. I don't know if you
I
wh
don't know what that
when
is.
I'm telling my age now, but when I was in school, we had the blue pigs, and it was, a division of the Detroit Police Department, and they were a band. They come
Oh,
to your
okay.
school, and they sing, and then they play their instruments, and the reason that that's cool and important is because as a kid, I got to see police officers as human beings, right? I got to interact with them in ways that were positive and not just know the police as somebody you call, when something bad is happening.
This is probably a premature question, but we have a new police chief now, and
Mhm.
I think folks were wondering when Chief Bedison was appointed.
Mhm.
You know, we've got a new mayor coming in as well. Would there be some kind of change there? Have you been tracking his performance? What do you would you stick with him?
I think Chief Bedison has done a really good job. I think his relationships in the community, especially with community violence intervention groups, has been phenomenal. I think the work that Chief White started and that he's continuing is really important, more of a focus on mental health and other issues. Again, we can't police everything away. There has to be a new approach. And I would want to bring more of that approach to the police department. I think we need more social workers. I'm a social worker, so of course, um, I'm a little biased, but more social workers in the police department because everything doesn't require a badge and a gun, right? And we have to address some of the other issues that are happening in our community and it'll reduce crime and it'll reduce our costs to the police.
So wait and see on Chief Bedison in particular, though. I'm hearing.
Yeah, yes, wait and see. But I do think Chief Bedison has done a good job. Yes.
When he was deputy mayor, he helped basically stand up the community violence intervention program,
He
the
did,
Shot
yeah.
Stoppers program,
Mhm.
not to be confused with Shot Spotter.
Right.
Um, right now there is a influence campaign, a battle, however you want to describe it, in Lansing.
Mhm.
The mayor had House Speaker Matt Hall in the city recently to advocate for um, that bill being passed, so that
Mhm.
new funding could be unlocked, go across the state. In Detroit, we would use it to fund this program, keep it
Mhm.
going permanently. It sounds like the Republican House Speaker is going to get this through. There's some concerns about what might happen in the Senate if
Mhm.
it gets connected to some police accountability measures potentially.
Mhm.
Have you been tracking this conversation in Lansing? You have some experience advocating for bills in Republican legislatures.
Mhm.
What kind of insight do you have on where this is headed?
I don't have any insight. I've been watching too, but like most, I'm watching from the sidelines. I say kudos to the mayor for working to get it passed, and, I think one of the things that he has been good at is going to Lansing to try to bring, resources and programs home for Detroiters, so, yeah, I hope it works.
Mhm. Public transit, let's talk about that.
Mm.
There was a big push to double DDOT's funding
Mhm.
over the next couple of years. The mayor included a $20 million increase in the budget for this year.
Mhm.
Advocates at it had been hoping for a little bit more investment,
Mhm.
but we're basically told that the service is going to get better
Mhm.
over this year with this new money.
Mhm.
It will even get better than pre-pandemic. We're going to, not only restore pre-pandemic service, it's going to be better. What is the future for public transit under a Jenkins administration? What would
Mhm.
you like to do?
I well, first, kudos. I'm glad that DDOT got an additional $20 million under a Jenkins administration. We will make sure that DDOT is appropriately funded. But again, this is where the management piece comes in because it's not just funding. We have to make sure that all the vacant positions are filled, right? Almost every year. And if you're tracking the budget, and I know you are,
You
you
can see
don't.
the rings under my eyes from tracking the budget this last.
Were you there until midnight?
I was watching online, but yeah, I was up.
Yes. Yes, but and I will say kudos to council for staying to get it done too, because that's what you have to do. But, often DDOT dollars, even though they're underfunded, they often end up giving money back at the end of the budget year because there are so many positions that go unfilled.
Mhm,
So we have to make sure that we're paying our bus drivers enough, right, to make it competitive with other systems in the region, but also make it so that they can take care of their families,
mhm.
right? During COVID, we had the Frontline Worker Program, which was helping a lot of bus drivers who couldn't pay their bills. That shouldn't be the case, right? We should pay them enough. But also it's making our routes make sense, having more routes on main thoroughfares. We have an app. The app should work and tell you in real time where buses are and when they'll show up, not an estimated time.
Mhm.
Because the benefit to the rider isn't there if the app isn't real time.
I'll tell you right now, I missed a bus to city council this week because I was relying on the app and it drove right by me before I got to the stop. So
Yeah,
it
yeah.
happens.
So you could have planned better,
Mhm.
right? If you had known what time the bus would actually come. And we have GPS. So there's no reason why we can't know when the bus is showing up for real. The other thing is making sure we have enough mechanics, right? Because sometimes when buses aren't on the routes, it's not because of drivers, it's because there's a bus in for service and we don't have enough mechanics to fix the buses. So there are so many little things that go into how well our system runs. And you'll need a good manager of DDOT, but a good mayor to find a good manager
Mhm.
of
I,
DDOT.
I won't ask you for every department if you're going to keep the person or not, but just know that I'm thinking about that. Um, do you think that there's studies in the next year or two that are going to be done about expanding the people mover,
Mhm.
possibly with some new routes, some new lines. I'm not sure how that would work exactly.
Mhm.
And I think same for the Q line as well.
Yes.
And now there's talk about creating a train from Toronto all the way to Chicago that would run alongside
Yes.
Michigan Central at the old former train depot there.
Mhm.
Do you think it's time for us to start thinking broader about transit? And I ask that too because I hear people say, let's really focus on the bus system first. Let's get this up and running, and then we can do some pie in the sky stuff. But like, I don't know, maybe it's not an either or. What's
Th
your perspective on
It's definitely not an either or. It's both and I will be the both and mayor. It's
that?
it's downtown and neighborhoods. It's buses and it's rail, right? It's past time, right? M1 should have been, and I know that there were a lot of difficult conversations and circumstances, but we should have been focused on making sure that M1 went from the river to Pontiac when we built it. Right, and I know, again, the people mover, there were some difficult circumstances there too, although I was a kid, but, yes, we have to think about multimodal transit when we talk about public transportation.
Another big thing that's going to happen this year, transit related, is there's going to be labor negotiations with the ATU, the union that represents bus drivers.
Yes.
And we do this kind of like piggybacking thing with the suburban smart, the
Mhm,
suburban bus service. They had their labor negotiations last year and they became the highest paying for transit operators in the state.
mhm,
We got a bit of a bus fund increase for drivers, and then all of a sudden they leapfrogged us. you know,
mhm,
we're kind of competing with our own
we are.
regional partner in this to keep drivers here. And the opt out, this is probably too much background. Sorry for folks who are listening. Detroit can no longer opt out of a millage that funds regional transportation in the state in Southeast Michigan.
Mhm,
And so it's been proposed to me as perhaps an opportunity for us to think about combining forces with the regional transit authority
mhm.
that operates smart, the regional bus system. Um, I don't know. Do you think that there's a world in which we merge those two entities together? Does it make sense to have a city bus system while we have a regional bus system that's kind of along some of the same routes? What do we do about this?
I think we have to consider it. We have to consider it. And other major cities have regional transit authorities. We're often concerned about who has the control, right? At the end of the day, um, and I don't want to oversimplify it because then we'll also be talking about assets and pensions, and there are all kinds of considerations. But we have to look at it and figure out if it's something that we can make work if it is better for our residents.
When was the last time you rode a bus?
I will be on the bus on Monday, but prior to Monday, the last time I rode a bus was probably, um, 3, maybe 4 years
Hmm.
ago.
There's a lot of folks that don't ride the bus and they don't see why we're even talking about it as an issue. They don't
Mhm.
understand the importance of it. How do you get those folks on board with either investing tax money into a transit system or understanding why this is something that the government should offer in the first place?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. Detroit is very unique. We're the motor city. And when you go to other cities, it's seen public transit isn't seen as a negative, that is something for other people, right? And we have to change our culture so that people understand public transit is just that. It is a mode of transportation for everybody, but it's also more economically friendly in a city that has the highest insurance
Hmm.
rates in the state and one of the highest in the country. It's more environmentally friendly, in a country and a world that we're all trying to hang on to as long as possible. It's more convenient, right? You can text all you want on the bus and not worry about running into the back of somebody. So there are all kinds of positives that go along with riding a bus, and we just have to talk about it more. We have to change the culture and the way we think about what public transit means.
Let's talk about education. You're advocating for the city having some kind of larger role or influence over how education works in the city.
Mhm.
What does that look like? There's been conversations about the mayor taking some kind of, higher leadership with DPSCD. I haven't exactly heard folks explain what that would look like
Mhm.
beyond just we're going to partner with them. So
Yeah.
for you, what's your plan on that?
Uh, Somebody will say, "Well, why doesn't the mayor take over the schools?"
Hmm.
Because then they can control what happens, and right, there are pros and cons to that. And by the way, every time I do a poll, the majority of people say, "No, the mayor should not control the schools."
Hmm.
But if we all believe the schools have to be stronger, if we all believe something needs to change, then we should all be willing to have a conversation about what that looks like, right? And it could be the current system, but the mayor is just more involved. We're leveraging our resources for things like after school programs so that if there isn't a recreation center in your neighborhood, but there's a school, those programs from 3 to 8 are in the school. And by the way, seniors can go too, right? And the city is providing or helping at least to provide the staff and the resources to keep it open. What that looks like is the mayor making sure there are safe routes, right, to and from school. We're addressing what in medicine they call social determinants to health. The mayor should be addressing those social determinants to education. The other thing that I would like to see is educational campuses across the city. And part of that master planning is starting with these educational campuses as the nucleus, and you're building out from there because that's what attracts families and keeps them is great school systems, right? When you look at Marygrove, the model that Marygrove has created is phenomenal, and now families are moving back to the Live 6 neighborhood because they want their kids to go to that school, those schools, which are part of the DPSCD system.
What about childcare? I've been hearing
Yes,
about how expensive it is.
yes,
It's basically like an extra rent payment for folks.
yeah.
I think there's also a kind of lack of immediate access.
Mm.
Maybe there's a affordable childcare, but it's on the opposite side of the city. What do you do then? What can the city do to incentivize the creation maybe of new
Yes,
childcare centers, get
yes.
more people into that career path?
Mm.
What do we need to do there?
So it goes back to that master planning, right? Because if we are evaluating the assets and the deficits in every neighborhood, we know where there's a lack of affordable childcare, and then we can provide incentives not only to build them, but grants to help people open them and technical assistance to make sure they understand what they're getting into and how to make sure it works long term.
I want to shift back to your experience at the city council.
Mm.
Um, One thing that really stuck with me, that struck me and stuck with me about the mayor's State of the City address recently, his
Mhm,
final one, was his kind of praise for the city council and their relationship, their
mhm,
working relationship. He had them up on stage with him,
mhm,
was a tradition that he actually started. I didn't realize that. What would your relationship with the city council be like?
mhm,
As somebody that served on the council and then would
mhm.
be the executive, what do you see their role is in, working with the mayor to address the problems that we've been talking about so
Mm,
far?
yeah. To use a quote from my former boss, Mary Mahaffey, city council is a quote, co-equal branch of government. And that's how I would approach it. They have to be your partners in government. And I would work with them closely as we're moving forward, even as we talk about the strategic plan for each district, council members should have a say in that. When I was not a proponent of districts, but one of the things that I said was if we have districts, council members have to have more say in how the budgets are spent in those districts because residents are holding them accountable. So I'd be partnering with council and treating them as an equal branch of government.
There are probably some folks that have listened to our conversation and thought, I like what I'm hearing. There's some good stuff here. But they also probably remember the circumstances in which you left the council,
Mhm.
which you've talked about. I'm sure a lot of people have brought this up to you,
Yes.
right? Um, you can explain that if you like, but I'm really wondering more about how residents should feel about you coming into a really big leadership position and how they can trust that you're going to be in it for the long haul
Mhm,
and not, leave if another opportunity comes up,
mhm,
basically.
mm. So it's easy. I've never left Detroit, right? And I'll always be in it for the long haul. When I was at city council, I was one of 9. And I don't know if anybody noticed, but when I left, although I was missed, the city kept going, right? The my last day at city council was the day we announced we were coming out of the bankruptcy. It was a proud moment in my life. We had gone through some tough times and made some really tough decisions, and a lot of people made sacrifices to make that happen. I was happy I was able to be in a leadership role at that time. And there was a 10-year plan of adjustment put in place. So I made sure there was a long-term plan in place, and my leaving would not cause any detriment to that, any large detriment.
Mhm.
The mayor is different. There's one mayor. There's- And when I um, ended my time as city council, I went and served Detroiters differently. I was serving the most vulnerable Detroiters. And even during my time at THAW, when people call city council for everything, including my lights were turned off.
Yeah.
Those council members called me. Right. So I've continued to serve council. I've continued to serve Detroiters, and I will continue no matter what role I'm in to serve Detroiters.
I've
So
I've heard this frame like she left, but you're saying you didn't leave.
I've never left Detroit, right? And I've never left Detroiters. And if you talk to the thousands of families, literally thousands, tens of thousands that I've helped over the last 10 years, what they'll say is, she was there for me. THAW was there for me. I've provided over $100 million in utility assistance as the CEO of THAW. That's work that I'm proud of, and nobody will ever make me feel ashamed of the fact that I did it.
So, talking about the district master plan idea of
Mhm,
having every city council be involved in this, intensive planning process. Um, we are at kind of I don't know if this is going to change in the near future, but we're at a 50% renter city now. So a
yes.
lot of those folks are homeowners. A lot of them are renters that tend to move around the city,
Mhm,
year after year, every, 2 years maybe. We have a transient population. So how would that affect some of the planning decisions when you
mhm,
have folks that are maybe moving around
mhm.
during the process even?
Part of the planning and has to account for growth, right? Areas where populations are growing and areas where populations are declining. It's got to account for both, but it also has to account for home ownership and renters. And part of the plan is to make sure we're planning for affordable housing for owners and renters. And we're creating programs to help people buy homes if they want. It's not for everybody, but for people who have that as a dream, we should have programs to teach people all the things they need to know about home ownership and then help them either get a grant for a down payment or create ways to help people save for down payment and low interest home loans. But we definitely have to make sure that affordability is a part of master planning.
The last thing I want to talk to you about is just framing our thinking around the choice that is, in front of voters this year. We're coming out of an era of this city where we've had, one person at the top for about a decade,
Mhm,
longer than a decade really.
mhm,
Um, and I hear some optimism from folks
mhm,
about the opportunity that that presents, and then also some fear about if we make the wrong decision, what
mhm,
happens.
mhm,
Help me get this across to voters how important this election is. How are you
mhm.
talking to people about that?
Wow. So someone said to me earlier today, this is the most important election since Coleman Young was elected. And I was like, wow. Um, and it was in terms of a few things, right? It's where we are right now in this moment in this city's history. is where we are right now in this moment in this country's history. It is where we are right now fiscally in this city. It is where we are in terms of what people see as a battle between downtown and neighborhoods. It's not a battle. It is about both. Healthy neighborhoods feed a healthy downtown, and a healthy downtown feeds healthy neighborhoods. So we need a mayor who really is about both and. The battle can't be Detroit versus Lansing or Detroit versus Macomb County. Right now, it is us versus the rest of the world. So when we're out there trying to attract new industries and major corporations, I should be talking to Macomb and Oakland and our Wayne County executive to say, hey, I need you all to go with me to pitch this because this helps all of us. So this is a time in the city where having a social worker is so important because social workers look at the big picture. Social workers build coalitions, and social workers know how to get things done on a shoestring budget and on a balling budget. So we need a mayor who is about both and I'm that mayor, Saunteel Jenkins. I'd like to be.
Well, let's leave it right there. Ladies and gentlemen, Saunteel Jenkins, thank you so much for joining us on
Thank
Detroit
you.
Next.
Thank you. SaunteelJenkins.com. Thank you.
Detroit Next is a community-led project from Bridge Detroit and Detroit is Different, which means that we can't do this work without you. We need your support. If you have a question or a comment and want to participate in this process throughout the year, give us a call. We have a phone line set up at 313-284-6407. Leave us a message and we'll play it on the podcast. If you like what we're doing, head to BridgeDetroit.com and subscribe to our newsletters. All of that content, again, is free, no paywalls for anybody. We're trying to make this as accessible as possible. Head to our YouTube channel to get full episodes and interviews along with extra content throughout the year. You can also find the audio version of this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and DetroitNext.podbean.com. We're going to be doing this all year long, so stay with us. Follow Bridge Detroit and Detroit is Different on your favorite social media platforms and take this ride with us. Thanks.